It is just after dawn, and the man is doing what his father did, and his father before that. He steps in among the trees at the edge of his own land, axe loose in his hand, and reaches for a fallen bough, dead wood, wind-dropped, no use to anyone but a cold family waiting on a hearth. Somewhere behind the tree line, a horn sounds. He goes still, because the ground beneath his boots is his, the tree is his, and gathering that wood could cost him his eyes. This is not the story of a king seizing a man's land. The land stays in the family. What follows is stranger than theft. For roughly 150 years, an English king claimed the right to blind and to maim you for what you did on soil you legally owned, and the whole of that power hid inside a single word, a word that meant almost nothing like what you think it means. Welcome to Reason Found, where the ordinary world turns out to be built on buried law. Today, how a tree became a capital offense. Begin with the word, because the whole trap folds up inside it. Forest. Say it now, and you picture trees. Say it in 1100, and you meant something completely different, a legal boundary, not a landscape. After 1066, William the Conqueror brought a Norman habit across the Channel and pressed it down onto England, the royal forest. A forest, in law, was simply a stretch of country where the king held sole rights over the wild game and the greenery that fed it. Woodland counted, yes. So did open heath, marsh, rough grazing, ploughland, and very often whole villages full of people who had lived on that spot for centuries. The land underneath did not have to belong to the crown. That is the piece almost everyone misses. Your field might sit inside a royal forest. Your own coppice might sit inside a royal forest. You held the deed, you paid to work it, you buried your dead beside it, and the instant it fell within that invisible line, a second set of rules dropped over your life like a net. The net kept spreading. By 1086, dozens of forests had been marked across the kingdom. Under William's sons and grandsons, the edges crept outward, one afforestation at a time. To a forest was itself a verb of raw royal power. A king could simply declare your parish forest, overnight, and the old freedoms went dark without a single spade of your soil changing hands. By the 13th century, as much as a third of England answered to forest law, a third of the country, where the trees, the deer, and the plain act of clearing your own ground now belonged, in law, to the king. Which sets up the obvious question. If the king did not own the land, what, exactly, could he do to you for using it? Everything narrowed to two words the foresters lived by: venison and vert. Venison meant the beasts, and not only deer, but any creature of the chase, wild boar included. Vert meant the green, the trees, the thickets, the low cover the animals sheltered in. Guard the vert, and you guarded the venison. So the reach of the law ran far, far past hunting. Here is what could drag you before a forest court. Felling a tree, breaking a patch of your own land to plough it, they called that an assart. Carting off fallen timber, stripping the berries too greedily. Raising a fence, if that fence might keep the king's deer out of your crops. Losing your pigs at the wrong season. Ordinary survival, line by line, rewritten as crime. And the penalties climbed in rounds. First came fines, a few shillings for the small stuff, a crushing £100 for the worst, enough to break a family for generations, then prison. Then, for graver work, the body itself, blinding, castration, and at the very top of that ladder, reserved above all for the killing of the king's deer death. To drive it, the crown raised a second legal world, not the common law that ruled everyone else, but its own machinery, the Swanimote courts, and a whole tier of officers, foresters, verderers, agisters, regarders reporting to the king alone. The royal treasurer, Richard Fitz-Nigel, said it plainly in the 12th century: the forest keeps its own law, resting not on the common justice of the realm, but on the naked will of the king. Even the dogs stood sentenced. Any large dog kept within a forest had to be lawed. 3 claws struck clean from its forefoot, so the animal could never run down a deer. Officials came round on their rounds to inspect the paws. A missing toe was proof of obedience. By now you can feel the weight of it pressing. So where did a law this savage even come from? The tale everyone half remembers, the blinding king who loved his deer like children, is exactly where the legend and the record begin to pull apart. Open the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and you meet a monster. Its writer sets down William the Conqueror, laying out his great deer preserves and decreeing that whoever slew a hart or a hind should be blinded. He forbade men to kill the harts and the boars, the Chronicle says, and he loved the tall deer as though he were their father. The rich complained, and the poor lamented, and he cared nothing, though every soul might hate him. Around that seed grew a darker story still. To carve out his new forest in Hampshire, so it was told, William flattened villages and pulled down churches, driving families from land they had farmed for lifetimes, and when his son, William Rufus, later died in that very forest, felled by a stray arrow. The chroniclers murmured that the arrow was God's own verdict on the sin. It makes a flawless villain's tale. Now here is the honest part. Much of it will not survive the records. Modern historians read the Conqueror himself as comparatively restrained by the horrors still to come. That famous line about blinding smells more of propaganda than of statute. The New Forest rests on thin, sandy, hungry soil that could never have carried the many settlements he was blamed for raising, so the Great Eviction looks, by most careful accounts, like a myth. Yet the truth turns out almost worse, because it is greyer, and it lasted far longer. William Rufus, the son, drove the penalties up toward death and mutilation. Under Richard the Lionheart, taking a single deer could bring blinding and castration together, and the whole grim apparatus curdled into a money engine. King John's foresters levied fines on entire communities when no single culprit could be named, wringing revenue out of the countryside on the king's behalf. If buried lore like this is your thing, a quiet subscribe genuinely helps the channel keep digging, because the force that finally broke the forest system was not a merciful king at all. It was a document you have almost certainly never heard of, sealed in the name of a boy. In 1217, standing in the shadow of its far more famous twin, England issued a second great charter aimed squarely at the forest. That charter even handed the first one its nickname. People began calling the longer document the Great Charter, Magna Carta, purely to tell it apart from the forest one beside it. The Forest Charter did what generations of the maimed and the fined had begged for. Its 10th clause runs short and astonishing. No man, it declared, shall henceforth lose life or limb for taking the king's venison. A convicted poacher might be fined, or gaoled a year and a day, yet never again blinded, never again gelded, never again hanged, over a deer. And it gave the land back, right by right, each one with its own worn old name. Free men could once more drive their pigs into the oaks to fatten on the autumn mast the rite of pannage. They could gather deadfall for the hearth estovers. They could cut turf for the fire turbary. They could raise a fence, sink a pond, turn a corner of their own ground to the plough, without a forester materializing at the tree line. Rights their grandfathers had lost were, quietly, handed home. Picture the first autumn under it. A commoner walks his pigs in among the oaks, boots dark with dew, straining for a horn that, this season, carries no threat in it. The exact act, the wood, the woodland, the beasts moving through his own trees that a generation before could have cost him his sight, now simply lawful, now simply home. And the strangest twist waits at the end. That forest charter did not flare up and fade. It hardened into the longest-lived statute in all of English history. Its clauses stood on the books until 1971, when a modern act at last swept the final scraps of forest law away. Even now, the old courts have not wholly died. Verderers still gather, to this day, in the New Forest and the Forest of Dean. So the tree was never really about the tree. It stood in for a harder, plainer question: who commands the space around your life? A medieval king answered it by drawing a line no eye could see, then daring you to step across it, on your own land, at the price of your eyes. We buried that answer beneath a soft, green word. Say, forest, today, and you think of a walk in the woods. For a third of England, across 150 years, it meant the exact reverse, a place where the wild ran free and the people did not. That is the world folded inside one ordinary word. If you would like the next one turned over, stay with us, we have a long shelf of them. Until then, watch the tree line.